I want to speak about incarnation, a word we traditionally use almost exclusively in a Christian context. And in the Christian context, these tend to be the dominant meanings. Incarnation happened once and forever through the person of Jesus and only through Jesus. God sent Jesus for one purpose: to save sin-laden humanity. This can only be accomplished in and through the historical Jesus. Only when humans are redeemed through the power of the cross, through the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, only then can creation be saved. And this is really important to get that priority right. In this traditional view, humans come first, creation comes afterwards. There are several developments of our time that suggest we need to reconsider that one. And all this can only be achieved in and through the Christian faith, through the Christian church. The new horizon of incarnation that I'm exploring and have explored in this book, there are two key words. Number one, incarnation is about embodiment. The God who is forever working in and through bodies. The primary body is the universe. Planet Earth is a body. Trees have bodies, animals have bodies, and we have bodies. So embodiment is a key word for the new understanding. And then secondly, there is a universality to the deeper meaning of incarnation, which goes beyond not merely Christianity, but all the formal religions we know today. Sally MacFaig, the Canadian theologian, offers a very useful and rich summary. Thus, Christianity's manner of making contact with the most basic physical, biological processes is through an inclusive, radical interpretation of its doctrine of the Incarnation. Not now merely in one human being, Jesus of Nazareth, but in the world as God's body. So you see where she's introducing the notion of the body as being very central here. God is always incarnate, always bound to the world as its lover, as close to it as we are to our own bodies, and concerned before all else to see that the body, namely God's world, flourishes. And that word flourishing is picking up John's Gospel. I've come, chapter 10, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. Roger Haidt, the Jesuit, in this very recent book, 2019, Faith and Evolution, one cannot imagine a more magnificent and yet more intimate formula of incarnation than creation itself. He's saying we need to get things back to that priority, or reclaim that priority. Creation provides the basis for God within. Creation, affirmed in the context of an immense universe and a quiet experience of God within the self, provides the foundation for the meaningfulness of the term incarnation today. So what both of them are saying in those quotations, the need to expand and deepen our understanding of incarnation. Now, insofar as incarnation is primarily about body, then our ancient ancestors, going back I don't know how long, and in several of our indigenous peoples today, they identify that sacredness within the earth as that of living spirit. The note on which the book of Genesis opens up the whole story. The spirit who breathes, the spirit who draws forth creativity from the chaos of creation itself. And that is the starting point, it seems to me, through which we can reformulate and redefine what we understand by incarnation. This notion of the Great Spirit, which our indigenous peoples use all over the world, I first encountered it in the Australian Aborigines about 20 years ago. I met it later in the Maori people of New Zealand, and among several groups in Canada that I had the privilege of working with. with various groups in Africa and with some of the mountain people of the Philippines. And eventually I got around to writing it up in this book. In the beginning was the Spirit. The oldest incarnation of God known to our species is in and through the power of Spirit. Implications of this for a theology of the Holy Spirit is another day's work. So to look then at this material, this very brief description of what we mean by the Great Spirit is useful. Primal peoples respect nature because they see it as the manifestation of Spirit. And since they see themselves as manifestations of Spirit also, they feel a sense of kinship and connection with nature, a sense of sharing identity with it, which contrasts with the sense of otherness to the natural world which we normally experience. In other words, we have been kind of indoctrinated in dualistic splitting. Earth versus heaven, body versus soul, matter versus spirit. That's what's meant here by the otherness. Primal peoples see themselves as custodians of the land, looking after it on behalf of the Great Spirit. That is not quite accurate. They see the land, they see the soil as where the Great Spirit is most tangibly and immediately connecting with them. It's in and through their earthiness that they make the connection. A connection which I think our ancient ancestors made over many thousands of years. Pope Benedict in Laudato Si, Pope Francis in Laudato Si, it is essential to show special care for indigenous communities and their cultural traditions. For them, land is not a commodity, but rather a gift from God and from their ancestors who rest there. A sacred space with which they need to interact if they are to maintain their identity and their values. So, this is a rather quick but an important resume of the spirituality of our indigenous peoples mediated through the notion of the Great Spirit. And this then becomes the foundation stone, or the foundational elements for a contemporary theology of incarnation, it seems to me. Our earthiness constitutes our primary identity. We're born out of the earth through the mediation of our parents. It defines the context of our belonging. It illuminates our sacredness. It is the formative womb of our becoming, the recycling web to which we return, and the home in which our ultimate meaning is embedded. So much of our inherited spirituality, particularly in earlier times, was about fleeing the world, abandoning the world, turning our back on the world, to escape from this vale of tears to the happiness hereafter. This is a complete contrast to all that. It's saying it's not by accident that we are creatures of the earth. And it's in and through our earthiness that our embodied God works in us, with us, and through us. And therefore Elizabeth Johnson gives a rather nice and an important reminder to us of the implications of this. She says, neglect of the spirit and of the religious value of the natural world seem to go hand in hand. That if we were much more deeply grounded in our earth and more intimately connected with it, then we would realize that this power of God as living spirit is the primary energizing and empowering source of everything that is, for us Christians and for all people. Around the world, in the different cultures, these are some of the namings of the Great Spirit: the Lakota, Wakantanga, and from the Hopi people, Nassau in America. For Polynesia, which they also follow in New Zealand, Mana, New Guinea, Amunu, the newer peoples of Africa, Kowot, the Mubuti people of Africa, Pipo. In Latin America, Ekiko and Makanaima are just two of the names. This lovely symbol, which they use a lot in West Africa, and adopted by Jews, Christians and Muslims, known as the Jai Nyame. Its native African translation means, no one lives who saw its beginning, and no one will live to see its end, except God. I think the understanding of God there is very close to what the indigenous peoples mean by Great Spirit. So the Great Spirit, or the living Spirit, energizes the energy of all creation, permeates everything, and embraces all, persons and non-persons alike. So I'm introducing here the whole notion of energy. And to develop that more fully from a spiritual point of view, we would need to go into a theology of what we call the Holy Spirit, and that is for another time. This nice statement from Norman Wirsba, an American theologian: creation is one lavish act of hospitality, care, nurture, and celebration. It is God's love made material. And there we're breaking through so many of the inherited dualisms that have been such a major part of our lives. Elizabeth Johnson, from this book, Creation on the Cross: God's Spirit breathes the world into being, dwells in all things, quickens love into flame, inspires the prophets, and renews the face of the earth. So it's the Spirit that's the primary embodiment of incarnation in this expanded view. Now, how Jesus then fits into that expanded view is something I will deal with in other presentations. For the people working on the theology of the Holy Spirit, I just pick out two: John Haughey, a Jesuit, and Leonardo Boff. For Haughey, the Spirit was sent with a mission and has been carrying out this mission not just since Pentecost, but ever since there was life. And Leonardo Boff links it in then with modern science, particularly with the new story, new cosmology. To fully understand the Spirit, we need a different paradigm, more in light with modern cosmology. The energy that upholds the universe and all the beings that have been and will be penetrates creation from beginning to end. Now, one of the issues here that needs a lot of attention is some people will say to me and have said to me, but all this emphasis on Spirit sounds very impersonal. I believe in a personal God like Jesus. I think there again we're stuck with a dualism between the personal and the impersonal. The way through that is to try and bridge the dualism into what we call the transpersonal. And the transpersonal would be something like this: I am at all times the sum of my relationships, and that is what gives me identity. And in the sum of relationships, we move beyond this splitting into the notion of the transpersonal, which sees a sacredness in everything. A nice story to bring some of all this together and give it a deeper grounding in reality. This is Lawrence Anthony, a South African businessman, who many years ago became very concerned about the wild rogue elephants in South Africa, which were creating a lot of havoc, particularly in the villages at night. And this was back in the apartheid days. The South African government of the day made a decision to exterminate them. He asked them not to, that he had a big patch of ground which he was happy to turn into a game reserve and would try to re-domesticate the elephants. If he did not succeed, he said, fine, let's exterminate them. The South African government agreed, and he came to be known as the Elephant Whisperer. In 2001, in the second attack in Iraq, one of the first things that was totally destroyed by the Western forces was the zoo. He was horrified at seeing what happened there, got on a plane with a few colleagues, went out to Baghdad, against all odds got some Americans and Iraqis working with him, and restored the zoo in about 6 months to a functioning zoo once again. He died in 2012, and then this is what happened. He died of a heart attack. For 12 hours, 2 herds of wild South African elephants slowly made their way through Zululand bush till they reached the house of the late Lawrence Anthony, the conservationist who had saved their lives. The formerly violent rogue elephants, destined to be shot a few years ago as pests, were rescued and rehabilitated by Anthony, who had grown up in the bush and was known as the Elephant Whisperer. They had not been to the house for 18 months, or they had not been around the house. For 2 days the herds loitered at Anthony's rural compound in the West Tula Tula Game Reserve in the South African KwaZulu-Land to say goodbye to the man they loved. The first herd arrived on Sunday, the day after he died, and his body was in the house at this stage. And the second herd a day later. They all hung around for about 2 days before making their way back into the bush. What is more interesting, and this information is from one of his sons, that on the anniversary of his death in both 2013 and 2014, a group of elephants visited his home place and stayed around for a number of hours. This is not just a remarkable story about elephants. To my mind, if Jesus was around today, he would be telling this as a parable of incarnation. This is spirit at work. And the spirit in the animal, connecting with the spirit of the human, even beyond earthly life. To my mind, this touches very deeply into this deeper, more comprehensive and more embracing meaning of incarnation that I'm exploring in this session. So when it comes to the issue then of the Great Spirit, these are some of my summary points. Sacredness has neither beginning nor end. Sacredness is. Ultimate mystery is intimately near. That would be a nice definition of incarnation in this deeper meaning that I am reviewing. Our earthliness is the medium that connects us with the divine. And you've heard me repeat that over and over, and it needs to be repeated over and over. Such as the contrast that's there to this dualistic splitting that unfortunately has been such a major part of our faith and our upbringing. For the indigenous peoples, they don't worship the Great Spirit, they seek to co-create with it. So they have many rituals. The rituals are not to pacify God. The rituals are not asking even for forgiveness from God. The rituals are an attempt to align their spirit with the Great Spirit so that they can work together more harmoniously and cooperatively. For our indigenous peoples, ethics and morality is about relating rightly with all creation. And as with worship, when it comes to prayer, they don't pray beseeching God like we do. Prayer is about expressing spirit rather than about addressing God. Very close to Paul's letter to the Romans. It's not we who pray, it's the Spirit of God who prays in us. And how do we become more aligned with that and allow it to modify and change our lives? So then, by way of conclusion, as we move towards the end, a nice quotation from Elizabeth Johnson. So, in the reconstruction of this idea of incarnation, we don't begin with Jesus. I'm not ignoring Jesus. I'm not trying to get rid of that part of our faith story. But there is a primacy about God as Spirit. That is the primary embodiment of our God in creation. And since incarnation is about embodiment and universality, this is where we need to begin, it seems to me, in redefining the theological notion of incarnation. It saddens me that theologians have not yet got there. Hopefully they will in the not too distant future. A creator spirit dwells at the heart of the natural world, graciously energizing its evolution from within, compassionately holding all creatures in their finitude and death, and drawing the world forward towards an unimaginable future. The future of our evolutionary story and our evolutionary journey. Through the vast sweep of cosmic and biological evolution, the Spirit embraces the material root of life and its endless new potential, empowering the cosmic process from within. So in other words, in this case, the Spirit is not about trying to separate us from nature or get us out of this veil of tears to the happiness of a life hereafter. These are earlier ideas that we now need to transcend and outgrow if we're to embrace and enter into this new theological horizon. The universe in turn is self-organizing and self-transcending, energized from the spiraling galaxies in the double helix of the DNA molecule by the dance of divine vivifying power. It's a very loaded quotation, but in many ways it's a valuable resume of what I've been exploring throughout this input. And so, as the young man is inviting us, let's expand our understanding of incarnation.